Hey everybody, we got a great one today, for a change. And let me tell you why. Maria Teresa Kumar, the founder and president of Voto Latino, is my guest, and that's how you pronounce it, Voto Latino. It's nice. It's not Voto Latino, like some xenophobes might do. Voto Latino. It's not a command. Voto Latino. That attitude is just not going to turn people out. And I know what you're thinking. So far, I don't like this podcast. That Voto Latino thing, that just frankly makes me feel uncomfortable. And I get that. And some of you are thinking, wait a minute, this is the third time Maria Teresa has done the podcast. And that's true. Well, you might be thinking then, how can you say this is a great one for a change? Aha. Maria Teresa has been compelling, brilliant, and fascinating the last two times she's been on. It's just that I was way, way off my game in those two shows. But this week, I am smoking hot, for a change. And I can say that because we've already recorded the interview, and if I do say so myself, I am extremely good in this one. Finally. And you know why? Because I let Maria Teresa talk. I don't impose myself in the conversation just to hear the sound of my voice like I usually do. A number of you have told me to listen to the guest and not interrupt the guest. When they're trying to complete a good point. Peter, isn't that right?
Yeah, Al, you really got to be.
I listened to Peter, and voila, we got a great one for a change. Maria Teresa will be on in a little bit, and you will be blown away by what Voto Latino does. They've registered 600,000 voters just this cycle. And they're still doing it in the lead up to Georgia now because a lot of Latinos, Latinx, have turned 18 since November 3rd. So they're just, bam, they're on it. They counter information that their people are hearing from the bad guys. You're a newly registered Latino. Do you know that you can just text your vote in to 555-555-VOTE. It's that easy. Those Republican jerks. That's what they do. And Voto Latino tells their people, don't listen to that stuff. Now, I want to be careful here because I don't want to give you the impression that Republicans are all bad guys. Larry Hogan, Maryland governor, Republican. Charlie Baker, Massachusetts governor, Republican. Mike DeWine, Ohio governor, Republican. Then there's the Lincoln Project guys, but then again, they're not Republicans anymore. We've had Steve Schmidt and Stuart Stevens on the podcast, and they have become disgusted with the party of Lincoln becoming the party of Trump, and that's what's happened. You have this fakakta lawsuit from the Attorney General of Texas, this Paxton, and 17 other state attorneys general from Republican states want the Supreme Court to overturn the election results in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Georgia. Not only do you have 17 Republican AGs, you now have over 100 Republican members of Congress who have signed on to an amicus brief, a friend of the court brief, calling for the Supreme Court to reverse the elections in those four states that went to Biden and just reverse the whole election to Trump. Now, in their brief, the Republican AGs keep citing an analysis by statisticians that the chances of Biden winning Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Georgia are less than 1 in a quadrillion. Now, I haven't checked their work, but it seems like funny math. Let me tell you what's closer to 1 in quadrillion. The chances of Donald Trump being president. Now, bear with me on the math here. I mean, obviously, he is the president, so it's 1 in 1, I guess. But let's do the math. The chances of any American being president is, I don't know, you got to be over 35. Let's just eliminate all women for now. So, because that's what it's been so far. So let's say just 1 in 100 million. Now, multiply that times the chances that the worst person in the world becomes the president. Because that's what we got. You got, what are the odds of someone becoming president in America? 1 in 100 million, say. But you got to multiply that times the number of people in the world, 7 billion, I guess. I think that's it. Because that's the chances of the worst person in the world becoming the president. So by my math, that is 7 billion, which is 7 times 10 to the 9th, and multiply that by 100 million, 100 times 10 to the 6th. And what I get is 7 times, well, since 100 million is 10 to the 8th, you get 7 times 10 to the 17th, which is more than a quadrillion. I think that's 700 quadrillion. So that's the chances of Donald Trump, or rather of one individual becoming the president of the United States times the chances are that that person is the worst person in the world, which is what we have. So now, later in the interview with Maria Teresa, I will display a little math prowess. And I'll just give you a hint. Mean median mode. A couple other things to get off my chest. My God, pass a COVID relief package. And don't give immunity to corporations so they can put their workers at risk. And feed people. This is sick. Chef Jose Andres wrote a great op-ed in the New York Times about the need for a Secretary of Food, which should be really the Secretary of Agriculture, should be the Secretary of Food and Agriculture. But you can call it whatever you want, but we should be ashamed of ourselves. Food insecurity has tripled during COVID. People are waiting for hours and hours in line in their cars for food. This is a disgrace. You know, earlier this year, dairy farmers were dumping milk. Livestock producers were killing their animals because they couldn't get them processed. This president, this country has failed in so many spectacularly unnecessary ways. I love that Tom Vilsack is going back to head up agriculture, be Secretary of Agriculture. And, God, we have to win Georgia January 5th. My guest next week will be Dee Taylor. He heads up the ground game in Georgia for Unite Here. I just spoke with him for about an hour. I did a Zoom fundraiser for Unite Here, and he is inspiring. He is inspiring. And look, this isn't about persuasion in Georgia anymore. This is about turning people out. It's about turnout. And they're hitting the doors. And he tells me that normally they get 7% of the people when they knock on a door, 7% talk to them. It's over 30% here. People want to talk. People are troubled. So listen, you can go to alfranken.com and we'll have a link for you to give to Unite Here on that. Also, we have a link for Second Harvest, my favorite food bank in Minnesota. One last thing. A lot of you don't know this, but I'm Jewish. I said it. And the Frankens are celebrating Hanukkah now, and my grandkids are getting underwear socks and slacks, just like I did as a kid. It's a beautiful holiday. But as you know, some very powerful people don't think so. And it's time to stop the madness. That's why my Al Franken podcast online store is offering my End the War on Hanukkah Christmas tree ornaments. Don't let Donald Trump and Sean Hannity and Jerry Falwell Jr. stop you from celebrating the Festival of Lights. The ornaments come in red and green and make a great gift for Jew and Gentile alike. So to get that ornament or any other of the merchandise that we have on the Al Franken online store, go to alfranken.com. Okay, let's go to Maria Teresa Kumar. This one is great, for a change. Welcome back, Maria Teresa. This is your third time on the podcast.
My goodness. Thanks for having me back, Al. I'm doing something right. Maybe.
I wouldn't necessarily say that. But no, you were the first podcast. That's what we call it. It's a podcast. Yeah. You were my first. And then we had you recently with Mark Elias, who's also a three-peat. So, but it's a very, very small group. It's Dahlia Lithwick, Andy Slavitt, you, and Mark Elias. So there you go. So,
well, I'm in great company. Well, thank you.
Elite group.
Thank you, Mr. Franken.
You bet. And last time we were on, it was with Mark Elias. And we were talking, of course, about the big focus was on voter suppression. And Mark is the Democratic election lawyer, probably the top one, and was in court a lot during the campaign, and then has probably been in court the whole time battling these really, really very difficult to beat election contests by the Giuliani team.
But I have to say that Mark does all of these lawsuits with such a sunny disposition. I've never seen someone more gleeful of going to court with Giuliani. It's wonderful.
Yeah, I wonder why. I mean, I wonder why. It's like, oh man, yeah, he really loves a challenge. That's what makes him happy. Are these? So anyway, so that was about voter suppression, and that's of course of black and brown people mainly. And today I want to talk about how we did this cycle. Of course, you're President Voto Latino, the founder, and you were registering people in the lead up to the election, and I want to kind of do a review of how Latinx people did, and I also want to get into Latinx because you're the one who dragged me into Latinx.
I dragged you into Latinx, yes.
Okay, and that was the last time you were on, and I understood because Latinx is a way you would refer to, it's the plural, Latinx. That's the opinion of many Latinx. Or it's the singular, going like, that is, you are Latinx, or that's a Latinx, that person's Latinx. But what I've heard since, so then I started using Latinx on your urging. I think almost you kind of forced me into it.
I did not. You asked me, and I explained it to you, Al Franken. Do not no revisionists.
Okay. I was easy to get to do it. But you obviously know this, that like only 10% of Latinx people know the term Latinx. This is the polling. Am I wrong about this?
So Latinx is meant to be all-encompassing, recognizing that not everybody identifies as it's for the non-binary individuals, right? And so
yeah, it's gender neutral. It's gender neutral.
Exactly, it's gender neutral. And so you have gender neutral where academics have been discovering this and, encouraging people to use it. But the fastest adopters are young progressive Latinos and young people. They're the ones that really embrace it. And it's the older generation that is saying, well, I don't see myself because I've never heard of it. And like everything, language takes time to adapt and mold. And lo and behold, who does Voto Latino register? We register young Latinx voters. And so Who am I to tell them that they do not identify as Latinx if they are telling us that, yes, they do? And what's interesting about, at least the work that we did is that we set out to talk to young Latinos like we always do. And that's because Al, as you know, when Voto Latino, when we first started 16 years ago, 30,000 Latinos were turning 18 every month. Now there's a Latino that comes of age every 30 seconds.
Wow.
And that is immense potential power. And we set out to register 500,000 registered voters before the pandemic, when a lot of on the ground operations closed and shuttered because they just couldn't do the work. We ended up registering over 600,000. And you and I both know that our 600,000 are only in 7 states. And it was in Florida and Texas. While we didn't do so great there, I mean, Texas, we turned purple officially. The last 5 remaining, we registered voters in Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania. It's a pattern. Those were the last 5 last states that we were waiting to see if Biden was going to go to the White House. And what's really exciting about that is that it was among young Latinx voters that Biden had his highest support. 73% of young Latinos voted for Biden compared to 65% of their older generation counterpart. And they helped secure Arizona and Colorado for the Senate, but they also, obviously made Georgia now in play. And it was one of the reasons why I think this is, what we do at Voto Latino is such a model for, other generations in the Latino community, is that we continue talking to Latinos after they register and even after they vote. And it's through a really online media strategy. We started seeing, everybody's now talking, Al, about the disinformation. We started seeing the disinformation back in 2019, and we flagged it for the powers that be. And so one of our strategies, where we normally engage anywhere from 10 to 15 Hollywood celebrities and folks, when we saw that this disinformation was a real issue, we identified over 267 influencers, people with followings, like Selena Gomez, who has 62 million, but just as importantly, people who were in El Paso who had followings as small as 3,000. And we were able to feed them the real information on voting deadlines, that no, you cannot vote by texting in. No, you cannot vote the next day after Tuesday. And just general information that when President Trump claims that he gave you COVID relief, all he did was sign a check, but that money actually came from taxpayers and from Congress. And so we deployed it understanding the rumblings. And the reason we knew the rumblings was because we were talking to our audience since long before 2016, so that when they started hearing misinformation, they would ask us, is this true? And then we were able to dig in deeper and really understand the sensibilities. And I think the biggest takeaway for the Democratic Party should be that you don't stop talking to your electoral base and your potential base after elections. You do not pack your bags. You have to be present in this new world order where everyone is consuming media ferociously, disproportionately online.
And you obviously just now gave us some idea about how thorough you guys are, and signing up 600,000 new folks this cycle and talking to them and using your influencers to talk to them, and also the people you've registered in previous cycles, right? You're talking to them as right. Well. Does the Democratic Party do a good job of this? In other words, that's what you do. Thank God that you're doing it. Georgia was so close. Arizona was so close. So it's very, very easy to argue that you made the difference. Nevada was so close. In Arizona, we did incredibly well, right, with Latino vote. Not so well in Nevada. I want to kind of go these state by state and area by area. And, of course, I'll do Miami-Dade maybe a little later, because that got a lot of focus, and that was about Biden being a socialist or maybe a communist, because a public option is socialism, and
but this is the thing. But in Florida in particular, I'll share with you, when I shared with you that we had seen disinformation bubbling up, this was in March of 2019, but we had seen that message long before. And this is where the Democrats as a party has to become much more sophisticated. Trump is deploying the Karl Rove strategy that got Bush into the White House, meaning he doesn't need all African Americans and he doesn't need all Latinos. He doesn't need the whole Jewish community. He just needs to skim off the top. and either having them vote for him or thinking that both parties are exactly the same. So they stay home, which is another form of suppression, right? And so it would happen in Miami-Dade. I will tell you, we would get funding from individuals and they'd say, I want it to go to Florida. And every single time, a good conscience says, Florida is practically a lost cause. I would encourage you to invest elsewhere. But if you're telling us Florida, let's go. But I always had that disclaimer because I knew how hard it was, because once you have this disinformation so much embedded in someone's psyche, you just need to do a lot of work that Biden started out, sadly, already behind the 8 ball on that.
Well, let's talk about that disinformation. So we'll go to Miami-Dade, because obviously there are a lot of people in Miami-Dade of Cuban descent. And I guess this communist socialist thing would resonate with people who were from Nicaragua, say, or Venezuela, right? Is that sort of
that's right.
The playbook there?
Yeah, it was Venezuela. But this is what was interesting. Every single Latin American country has had a fight against guerrillas, right? With the exception, I'd say, of Brazil.
Is Brazil considered Latin America? That's another thing I want to talk about.
That's an existential question for everybody. So I can tell you that when we do census work, most people would say, well, Brazil's not Latin America. I said, it is Latin America. You just have to, message them differently. And for redistricting, everybody wants to be able to figure out how to, talk to them. But you have to unpack them
because they speak Portuguese.
Yep.
And I've been thinking, what's Hispanic? What's Latino? Now, Hispanic speaks Spanish. So Brazilian may be Latino, but not Hispanic?
Correct.
Wow. How sophisticated am
I? You are so good, Al. I mean, you are, I need to get you on the road.
Okay. Oh, you're pandering. I mean, you're blowing smoke up my ass. But okay, let's keep going. We're in Miami-Dade. We're talking about So in other words, Che Guevara is is kind of a figure in all of Latin America.
Right, exactly. And you have the Shining Path in Peru. You had FARC and ELN in Colombia.
So anti-communist resonates with Latino, Latinx, all those people.
all those people.
In
I appreciate your level of sensitivities as well.
Oh,
so,
that's sarcastic. Wow. Okay. Burn.
No. But this is the challenge, and this is where I had encouraged the campaign to really lean into, is that if we're honest, whether you fled communist Cuba or socialist Venezuela or democratic Colombia, the reason that people fled was not necessarily the government itself. It's the guise of the aspiration of that government. But really what people have fled is the vast, rampant corruption that is happening in these countries. So even Colombia, that was never run by a communist or socialist, it was always under the guise of a democratic government. In fact, it's considered the second largest democracy, second only to the United States.
Colombia? And
yet, Colombia, yeah. Because I could tell you, I mean, my family left Colombia because it was just a semblance of a democracy, but it is now no longer a failed state, but it was all on the verge of it. And it was vast corruption that has, hindered that country's growth.
Okay, so let's go back to Miami-Dade and this Bush Rove thing of skimming off the top. Now, George W. Bush was for immigration. I mean, that is, I think, a slightly different model than Trump's.
And that's kind of what I would argue was the proposition from Florida from the very beginning. It was more to neutralize and to just skim off the top, right? And so it was really the gains that Trump made in Miami-Dade County that put him over the top. Otherwise, it would have been more neutral. And people were more, I would say, more attuned to accepting these anti-socialist messages coming out of the Trump campaign. And at the same time, you have anti-immigrant people in power. And it's not Trump, but it is the Joe Arpaio's and the and the Brewers in Arizona. You had the Sharon Ingalls in Nevada. You had the Trancados in Colorado. You have you have Greg Abbott in Texas, and the same thing for Georgia and North Carolina. And that gives you the perfect storm. It was my experience. I grew up in California right when we were at a tipping point of having young Latinos and Asian Americans coming of age for the first time. And you had Pete Wilson that helped pass Proposition 187, the original Show Me Your Paper laws. And the chill that it put on my family and in the community at large, where all of a sudden our neighbors felt that it was okay to be hostile. When I was growing up in Sonoma, the town next door in Napa had the National Skinhead Rally marching up and down, right? And it was not unusual to go up to a stop sign and see the person next to you with a big fat Confederate sticker on their bumper. It was a very different moment. And so when I was growing up, I encouraged my family to become U.S. citizens and register to vote. And I had that conversation just like millions of my peers did. And that's what flipped California blue. And that's what happened in Colorado, what's happening in Arizona, what happened in Nevada, what's happening in Georgia, North Carolina, Virginia, it happened, and in Texas. Florida is not the same. In Florida, you don't have that anti-immigrant backlash. And so people have a different life experience. I grew up as a Colombian in rural California during Pete Wilson. My cousins who grew up in Miami had a very different life experience and, quite frankly, a very different worldview because they didn't have that hostility of an environment when they were growing up.
It seems to me, though, I mean, like Texas. Let's take
Yes.
Texas. So Texas was Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
And so what is the percentage of the population of Texas that is Hispanic?
You're sitting down, it's almost 51%, but they're not all of voting age.
Okay. But it seems to me that is there a feeling among Texas Latinx that they're kind of the majority, not the majority, but they're part of Texas. They're Texas.
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to, say, in Georgia or in Nevada.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I think that in Texas, even Lagoria always says, my family didn't move the border moved us, right? Like, she's always been there, right?
Yeah, we took it from Texas.
Right,
from Mexico,
right,
yeah.
From Mexico, right? So yes, I think there's different sensibilities, but you also have a state that has historically done a marvelous job with voter suppression. And so in 2016, Texas was the dead last voting state for about 25 years, basically since Ann Richards. And then in 2018, it went from dead last to 41st when it came to voting. And when it came this time around to early voting, Texas became number one in early voting. And we saw at Voto Latino that we're excited about, we saw a 600% increase in Latino youth voting. That's huge. Now, is it, did it flip the state? No. But did it make it purple? Absolutely. Because the only thing coming into voting age populations are young people in Texas, right? And so they're very much aligned with progressive values. And what I would encourage the Democratic Party and the progressive movement to do is to continue cultivating that power, because it is teetering on turning blue. And not just blue, but bright blue. When you ask young Latinos in Texas and young people in general in Texas what they care about, prior to the pandemic, it was healthcare, gun reform, the environment, and immigration in a red state. And so there just is an alignment of opportunity, but it means that you have to, we've been in Texas since 2010. Because we were seeing the demographics, we were seeing an increase in anti-immigrant legislators coming into office and that sort of thing. And so the work is not small, but we need to be patient to cultivate a group of Americans that don't necessarily identify with themselves in another party, but if they don't have the understanding of what makes you different, they'll sit it out.
Now, my understanding is that we did not do as well with Latinx people along the Rio Grande.
In the rural areas. Mm-hmm. And they're about 15% of the whole Texas population. I will also share with you that it was the first time since Clinton and Obama that the actual presidential candidate didn't go down to the Rio Grande Valley. And it was the first time that you had defund the police in an area that relies heavily on, a combination of defund the police and a combination of we're going to get rid of oil, traditional oil refineries and so on and so forth. Those are the two highest paying jobs for those folks on the border. And so in the absence of not having a conversation with the candidate, Obama went down there, Clinton went down there. They adored Clinton and still do. There was a vacuum to be left, right? It wasn't for lack of trying at VL. We were flagging what we were seeing, but we need to take this part seriously when there's so much opportunity left on the table of enfranchisement. I mean, these are also the folks that are disproportionately getting really hurt by COVID. And when you say Texas is getting ravaged by COVID, it's the Rio Grande Valley where they have the highest incidences of deaths, sadly enough.
Well, let's go to some states we won. Now, you guys did really well in Arizona, right?
Yes. No, yeah. I mean, overall, we're 40% of the folks that we registered and that we mobilized, because we identified 3.5 million who had basically sat it out in 2016. 40% of the people that voted early had sat it out in 2016.
So this could safely say that this made the difference there because it was so narrow. And Nevada was very close. And I heard this from Harry Reid pretty early on that this was going to be dicier than we had thought, because everyone kind of going into the cycle said, oh, Nevada's blue. Mm-hmm. And I heard it wasn't.
Yeah.
And that needed help.
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, in Nevada, we registered 22,000. And in Arizona, we registered 67,000. Georgia, we registered 36,000. These are all margins where he ended up winning by less than 20,000 votes, right? So when you start putting those types of, points on the board, and we encouraged people to vote early. So 30% of people that we registered voted early, which is also a big deal. Psychologically, it encourages other people in the community who might have trepidations about voting, that if their neighbors are doing it, then they should too. And then it also helps obviously feed the news cycle that people are voting and they're enthusiastic. And it also generates that type of excitement. And of the people we registered, 54% of them were new voters.
Also, you don't have to keep track of them. Once someone's voted,
right.
You don't have to bug them to vote.
Right, exactly. And so it allows us to shore up our resources so that we can focus on the people that haven't.
Yeah, I've been through a few campaigns, and that's
you
a
get
big
it.
deal. Getting vote. Would you vote already so we don't have to bug you anymore?
I know. So we can focus on others. Yeah, exactly right. Right. So we basically, the moment you vote, that we see it, and then we're able to again expend resources on others or expand it. Right. So in this case, we had identified 3.4 million because people were voting early. We were able to add an additional 300,000 individuals that met certain criteria so that we could bother them, right? So in total, our universe, we helped mobilize over 3.7 million early votes.
Okay, let's stop talking about Voto Latino for a second and talk about the rest of the Democratic Party. Where does the rest of the Democratic Party fall short? Because I have the feeling that, thank God for you, and thank God for Voto Latino, but can you give advice to the Democratic Party as a whole on what it should be doing and what these campaigns should be doing, these national campaigns and, my God, local campaigns? I mean, in Minnesota, we have a very large Latinx community who work a lot in meatpacking plants, right? Mm-hmm. So the populations of, Wilmer, which is the Jenny O turkey plant, and Austin, which has the Hormel plant. These are, you go all over south central Minnesota, and I would go very often to Catholic churches, to services that were all in Spanish. Mm-hmm. And I had nothing to look at. I mean, all I could do is look at Jesus because I'm Jewish. So I got fascinated with the depiction of Jesus, mm-hmm. which is, when Jesus.
I would have loved to have been in your head during that, by the way.
Well, here's what was in my head. Does Jesus have a six-pack? And then, it's all in Spanish. I don't know what they're saying. So I got a lot of time to think. And I'm thinking, like, could Jesus have been fat? I know he walked a lot, so he was probably in good shape. But he could make anything he wanted out of the food. He could make loaves into fishes. He could make, I would think, fish into a pork roast. I'm thinking, like, is it possible that the historic Jesus was very fat? This is what I'm thinking of while I'm in a Spanish language Catholic service. So you asked.
Yeah, no, I was curious. I didn't see it going there, to be honest. So thank you.
That's why I got paid a lot to write comedy, because that's what I thought of. Let's see, what would a fat Jesus? What would that sketch look like? I'm sorry.
I think I would.
I'm sorry,
say,
Catholics. I'm sorry, Christians.
I don't know. I think someone that I'm going to refrain. So
probably a good idea for you.
Yeah.
Probably would have been a good idea for me to refrain.
So where were we?
Oh, I don't know. We're, I think, politics. We're about voting and winning. Okay, so in southern Minnesota and central Minnesota, almost invariably the best restaurant in town is a Mexican restaurant. Right. And everybody goes there, and but we don't turn out that vote.
Yeah, no, even Wisconsin. Yeah, Wisconsin has the same thing. I think this is what we've been saying a lot at Voto Latino. I mean, Voto Latino, we happen to register voters, but our job really is to market democracy every single day. And we try to get young Latinos specifically because we know that 90% of them are U.S. born. And sadly, only 8 out of our 50 states require civic education to graduate from high school. And if they are first generation Americans, they're not getting civic education anywhere. And so Voto Latino, we fill that gap. And if you were to ask me, what is it that the Democratic Party needs to do, is that they need to have a strategy of engagement, that we are increasing that electoral tent and inviting people who don't know the system into the system of democracy, because 99% of the time they're aligned with democratic values. They're aligned with access to healthcare, with free, stellar public education. They are aligned with unions. They're aligned with the fundamentals of what the Democratic Party espouses. And what the challenge has been, and I've heard this for so many years now, is that it's almost an either or, right? That it's either let's maintain the consistent voter, and we'll expend the extra money to bring in more voters to the tent. And by that math, you're going to have a declining Democratic Party, because the growth in America happens to be through youth, and 2/3 of them happen to be youth of color, and a whole quarter of them are Latinos, right? So it is, 33% of those youth are Latinos. So you leave opportunity on the table when you only focus on the Latino vote, for example, in California or even in Florida, because the fastest demographic of Americans are Latinos in all pockets of America.
I would love to pick your brain about doing, because I know you, how many states did you say? 9 states you were in?
We were in 7.
Seven.
Mm-hmm.
So you're in 7 states, but Minnesota isn't one of them. Of course not. But I would love to pick your brain about Minnesota, because by all rights, we should be doing well in rural Minnesota because of things like Medicaid expansion, also what Trump did in his trade war that hurt farmers so much, and we actually did worse. And I do think so. This is a side conversation.
You guys should be crushing it. Yeah, no, but you should be. The Democratic Party should be crushing it, because when it comes to issues, and this is what folks don't get, is that Latinos are the lowest purveyors of government resources, but they deeply believe in the role of government in their lives.
Let me ask you where, because this is something I've been focusing on, and it really does affect rural Minnesota and rural areas, which is where people get their information.
Yep.
Is that a challenge for you, or are you seeing something that we're not seeing?
Yeah, no, it's a huge challenge. And I think that so we started, I think I shared with you, we started really paying attention to disinformation because we started seeing the Trump campaign slamming my own Voto Latino staff with disinformation ads, right? And this was early. This was, I would say, 2018 or so that we started seeing it. And if they're hitting up my team because they fit a profile, and in this case, this was on his Facebook. He was AOC, loved Medicare, loved the Green New Deal, and all of a sudden he started getting ads from Trump campaign talking about socialism in Spanglish, perfectly done. And I was like, if they're hitting him, they're hitting everybody. Right? Like that's my interpretation. And so we started flagging it. And that's one of the reasons why we trained and identified over 261 influencers that had small followings such as 3,000 in El Paso, so that they can basically take the information that we needed their audiences to know, to say, look, no, you can't vote by text. No, Trump didn't sign those checks. But we needed to be in people's most intimate feeds, whether it was Instagram, whether it was Twitter, whether it was Facebook, because we knew that this was what the other side was doing very effectively. And what the Democratic Party really needs to figure out is that it has to, one, work with Facebook, because while Facebook was finding a lot of the disinformation in English, it wasn't flagging it in Spanish or any other language for that matter, right? So
that's really interesting.
Yeah. So people thought that they were getting real information, but it wasn't like, hey, check out our election center here in Spanish, right? And a lot of these groups are done undetected under WhatsApp and closed Facebook groups. I will share with you, I've been doing this work for 16 years. And for the very first time, when the woman that was running against Donna Shalala was posting stuff, for the very first time, I had family in Colombia saying, hey, you better watch out because she's very aligned with the ultra-right here in Colombia. I had never received that kind of message, but it made me realize that the information that immigrant communities are receiving is not just contained to American networks, but they're receiving an inundation of bad information from the outside. I'm fascinated with this. I can talk to you about this. Stephanie Shriak and I talk about this all the time. I'm fascinated because I think if you were to ask me, like, what is our the disruptor when it comes to our democracy, more so than Trump, it's the peddling of the disinformation where people don't have the digital literacy of consumption to understand what is true and what is not. And a perfect example, the Georgia election is coming up, and the fact that the RNC chair is hearing back the disinformation that their own, Republicans have absorbed, saying, well, I'm not going to vote in the Georgia runoff because you already told me it was rigged. That's real. That's a problem.
These two universes of information is the problem, one, if not the problem facing this country and maybe the world. I just had Tim Kendall, who was one of the founders of Facebook, or one of the early employees who developed their monetization system, which is advertising, which means get people to be on as much as possible so they'll consume as much advertising as possible. How do we do that? And the algorithms figure out each individual what they respond to, and a lot of people respond to more and more radically hateful information. So it's a huge problem.
And that is one where I will share, we're not ready for, the Democratic Party is just not ready for. I will share with you, I was talking to a senator, and they're like, yeah, we really love the way Voto Latino did influencers, so I want you to come in and brief us on that. And I was like, that's not the strategy, actually. The strategy is actually taking what happened to Michael Tubbs, the mayor of Stockton, where he was taken down by a extreme right publication that was functioning as the guise of the local newspaper.
I see. Stockton, California. It's in the valley there. It's a big agricultural center, right?
Mm-hmm. And so the local newspaper shuttered, and this right-wing organization popped up and dedicated 3 years of just posting these terrible memes. But what they do is really clever. They basically, it's kind of like Breitbart, right? They provide real news with just extreme news. Mm-hmm. And Michael Tubbs is an up-and-coming, he's the mayor of Stockton. He's an up-and-coming next generation of what the progressive movement is starting to look like.
So they targeted him.
In a brutal way. But I would actually venture to say that he was a pilot for what we should expect of this disinformation spread, and the Democratic apparatus does not quite understand it. We were able to see it firsthand up close at Voto Latino because we saw them targeting not just our staff, but our volunteers and all of that. So we were able to best of our abilities, adapt to it in short order, but it's far more complicated than even what we were doing. And so one of the charges that we're going to do, because we have a communications arm, we reach roughly about 8.5 million people a month, non-election. That is one of the charges that we're going to do, is actually start exploring more the misinformation so that we can combat it with real information.
Why do these right-wing people, they somehow get it in their heads it's fine to give people the worst misinformation possible?
Yeah.
It's fine to do that. That's what I want to do with my life. That's what I want to do, 60 hours a week or 80 if I'm, really... I don't want to beat myself up. I'm only giving out misinformation 60 hours a week. I really feel guilty. I haven't been spreading hateful misinformation for 80 hours. I'm sorry.
Well, because it's already out there. Everybody else will do it, right? Like, I'm sorry. No, but this is the challenge. I think that, when people say, well, why do they want to do that? I would say that they fall into two camps. One camp that is incredibly greedy and likes power, and the other camp that is just, they're white nationalist racists and have a really,
so they're better motivated. It's at least pure.
And then they converge, right? No,
they really believe it. Good for you.
But good for you. But this is the challenge is that it's not. It bleeds cross borders. So what we saw.
Well, you're getting from Colombia. Yeah. You're hearing about this.
Yeah. Right in Colombia, right? In Colombia, right? From my family, who is otherwise apolitical, telling me, "Hey, be careful because this candidate is a lot." I'm like, okay.
Gee whiz! Wow.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Oy. That's another way of saying wow. Oh boy. Oh, that's depressing. Okay, better, nicer, upbeat. Let's go up. Upbeat.
Okay.
The people you're registering, that group is just expanding.
When I started working and seeing the vision of Voto Latino, it was because we knew that there was going to be a seismic shift, right? Latinos have been the second largest demographic of Americans since 2003, Al. But it wasn't until 2020 that we became the second largest eligible pool of voters.
I see. That's what I'm saying. Your people are becoming voters.
Yeah, exactly.
In larger and larger numbers.
In larger and larger. To give you an idea, and this is where, the statistician in me gets really excited. The mode of whites is 58 years old. The mode of Latinos is 11.
Mode is the most, in other words, if you make a chart of everybody, there are more people that are 11 than any other age. That's the mode.
Exactly right. That's exactly right.
And the median is where you go to the halfway point of the population, right? So there's half the number of people are older and half are younger. Is that the median?
Yeah, and then there's the average.
And so then the mean, that's the mean.
The average.
What you're calling the average. Yeah. These are all averages.
So this is what's crazy. So the average is roughly 31, and that's median.
That's the mean.
That's the mean. Mm-hmm. The average, the mean, and then the median is 21 years old.
In other words, half are over 21 and half are under.
Exactly.
Okay, and the mode is the most common age. That's 11.
Mm-hmm.
And the mean is if you add up all their ages together and divide it by the number of them, you get, what did you say, 21?
No, now it's officially 30.
30.
The 11-year-olds are getting older.
Okay, but that's the mean.
Yeah, exactly right.
Okay, so this is for everybody for math literacy. They're all averages.
So, but this is the challenge, so that's why we started, so 1 million Latinos became of voting age starting in 2016. And that million Latinos coming of voting age isn't going to sunset for the next decade or so. And again, it's not just to the coast, right? It's not just to California or New York. It's everywhere in between. To give you an idea, in Georgia, I went to visit Georgia in 2016. That was the reason why I was like, we should do something in Georgia, which we set up for 2018. But I was I was doing a speaking engagement, and it was roughly at the time, 3% of the population or 2.5% of the population was eligible to vote. And to make a long story short, it turned out that the classroom was over 20% of Georgian classrooms were Latino under the age of 12th grade. So that's what was like, wait a second, this is something that's happening everywhere. John Edwards always talked about the mill town when he was running for office, the town that he grew up in North Carolina. That same town, when he was running for office, was already 51% Latino.
Right. So what's happening in Georgia? What do you see in Georgia?
In Georgia, since the November election, 50,000 young people have turned 18, not just Latino, but African-American and Asian American. And so we're running a program right now. We're working in coordination with Fair Fight and the New Georgia Project and registering voters. December 7th is the last day to register to vote. And then we're going to do the exact same thing we did afterwards, which is making sure that people vote early, making sure that we're identifying over 110,000 low propensity Georgian voters that are of Latino descent to get them out to the polls. It's going to be a very tight, close election. As I shared, one of the things that we do is we explain civics to folks. And so some people don't understand that the function of the Senate. And so we're very much explaining, in order, if you voted for Joe Biden, which they overwhelmingly did, you need to vote for the Senate so he has people to work with. If you care about healthcare, vote for him. If you care about, living wages, if you care about figuring out how to live post-COVID or immigration, go out and vote for the Democratic ticket so that he can have people to work with. But it's all teaching right now for the community.
And look, for everybody listening, this is the finish line.
Mm-hmm.
I've been raising money for Unite Here, which is the ground operation, big ground operation in Georgia. The ground operation is so important. What you're doing is so important. So I've been trying to raise money for them, and people are going like, I just am exhausted. I gave so much. And, I literally had a guy who is really rich, and I got this text from him, and he's just like, well, I gave 7 figures. That's how rich he is. He gave 7 figures. And so we're exhausted, really, and that's it. And I'm just thinking, like, we're 2 inches from the finish line. Mm-hmm. This is the finish line, and it's the control of the Senate. It's the control of the Senate. So
well, and who likes Mitch McConnell? Let's be honest. Really?
I can tell you this: no one.
Right. I'm like, that's good for that.
My Republican colleagues didn't like him, so
right.
And we don't like him, and so almost no one, I guess. Mm-hmm. I'm sure his family. I really like Dad. Grandpa. Okay. Maria Teresa, thank you so much as always. We'll look forward to number 4, when you're on with us again.
Oh, thank you so much, Al. For always having such candid conversations and for mobilizing the folks like only you know how. So thank you.
Well, I hope you enjoyed listening. That beautiful music is by Leo Kottke, the great Leo Kottke. I want to thank Peter Ogburn for producing this podcast. We'll talk again next week.